One of the things we need to be able to do is to go back and forth from one form to the next. So we're going to start by taking a look at a couple of equations that are in slope-intercept or point-slope form and think about how we could put them in standard form. So we need to remember what are the rules for being in standard form. Remember, there's an issue of order. We need the x term, then the y term, then the constant. There's an issue of integers, so no fractions, which also means no decimals. And finally, this first number has to be positive. So when we take a look at a problem, I usually try to tackle order first. Unless there's a fraction, then I tackle that first. Let's look at the first problem. I don't see any fractions, but I do see that x is on the wrong side. So the very first thing I would do is add 5x to each side. Since I can see that x is supposed to come first, I'm going to put it first. So 5x plus y is equal to 6. I check. No fractions, no decimals. The first term is positive. Everything's in the right order. We're done. Simple as that. The next problem is going to require a little bit more work from us. First of all, it's just kind of longer. And second of all, there's a fraction. And notice I put a hint right there. Clear the fraction before you do anything else. Remember, clearing the fraction means multiplying both sides by whatever that denominator is. So on the left, we have simple distribution, 4y minus 8. On the right, students tend to try to make this a little harder than it actually is. So I want you to think about this for a minute. 4 times negative 3/4 times x plus 5. That's what this really is. It's three things multiplying each other. If I gave you three random numbers, like 2, 4, and 5, and I asked you to multiply them, 2 times 4 times 5, you would probably say, well, 2 times 4 is 8, and 8 times 5 is 40. And you'd be right. And I need you to apply that same thinking in this problem. We're going to do 4 times negative 3/4 and get an answer. I hope you're going to realize that those 4's cancel each other out. That's why we multiplied by 4 in the first place. So now I just need to do negative 3 times x plus 5. Well, that's a distribution problem. So I'm going to distribute that negative 3 and get negative 3x minus 15. So let's come back to the problem. We now know that this is negative 3x minus 15. But typically your work will probably look something like this. We'll cancel those 4's. We'll have negative 3 times x plus 5. And then we'll do that second step, because normally you won't have done all of that thinking off on the side like we did a moment ago. Now I can start thinking about the rest of the issues. We got rid of the fractions, but x is definitely on the wrong side of the equation, so I'm going to add 3x to each side. That leaves me with 3x plus 4y minus 8 equals negative 15. Now, some of you will get pretty comfortable with doing this next step along with the previous step, but for now, I'm letting it be its own step. Notice I need all the constants to be on the right, so I've got to add that 8 to each side, which gives me 3x plus 4y equals negative 7. I now have everything's an integer, so no fractions or decimals. Everything's in the right order, and the a value is positive, so that's the problem in standard form. In the next one, we're asked to come up with an equation in standard form, not from some other equation, but from a picture. So we've got a graph, and we've got to figure out standard form. Now, with point slope and slope intercept, we just kind of looked for the pieces on the graph and plugged them into the equation where they went. But standard form doesn't work like that. None of the actual pieces of the graph are A or capital B or C. So we actually have to start with some other form. And I'm going to tell you the safest form to start with is the point slope form, because you can always do the problem if you approach it that way. Sometimes you can do it pretty easily with slope intercept, but because that only works sometimes, it doesn't seem like the best method for me to show you here. So we're going to start with point slope form. And we're going to write an equation in point slope form the same way we did back on that note sheet. You can pick either point that you want to work with. I'm going to choose this point specifically because the x value and the y value are different from each other, and it'll make it a little less confusing of what I'm putting where. So when I look at that point, remember this is x1 comma y1. So I'm going to take out x1 and replace it with negative 1. And then I'm going to take out y1 from my formula, and I'm going to replace it with -2. I can see I still have a missing slope. So my next goal is to figure out what's the change in y over the change in x. So if I look at how would I get from one point to the next, I can sort of make that little right triangle. And now I can see that the change in y looks like it went up 4. And the change in x looks like it went to the right 3. So that gives me a slope of 4/3, sorry, up and then over. Okay, before I start tackling anything about converting forms, I should simplify a little bit. We know that minus and negative is a positive, so I want to deal with that so I don't have any extra signs floating around. So now this is a lot like the previous problem. I've got a fraction to clear. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to multiply both sides by +3 because that will clear the fraction. And it will leave me with just some distribution to do on this side. Oh, I lost my color. I guess I'll continue in purple. So here I have a distribution, 3y plus 6 equals, over here I have 4x plus 4. Now I can start thinking about ax plus by equals c. I need that x term to come first. If you're ready for it, you could start getting in the habit of subtracting this 6 to the other side at the same time. Otherwise, you can wait and do that as a second step later. We've got -4x plus 3y equals -2. If you need to, pause for a minute and make sure you know how all that just happened. Now, this is the first time we've seen this issue come up. Remember, the a value is required to be positive. And right now, that a value is negative. So we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by a -1. I didn't get that from anywhere inside the equation. It's just something we know we have to do. That's how we can change the sign. But don't forget, that means I have to distribute it. So not only does the -4x become a +4x, but the +3y becomes a -3y, and the -2 becomes a +2. You've now written your equation in standard form.